I'm making this video to explain how I feel about learning and accepting and realizing that I actually am Enneagram 8. I mean, for years, this has been such a confusing process for me to understand who I actually am underneath what's going on and beyond what I think I am. So I'd say we're, a couple of days into this when I've had my epiphany of like, I'm actually an 8. And I've had so many people tell me that, but I was in denial about it. So I want to make this video to kind of what caused that to finally click and just kind of talk through this process. Why was I in denial this whole time? So I think what finally kicked it off for me is I was on a team call at work this past week, and there was, 30 people on the call, and it was a fun call. It was about New Year's resolutions. Well, I got, the whole time, I was one of the few people on camera. They asked me to be on camera, so I was on camera, and the whole time people are, trying to get me to talk. They expect me to fill in the gaps and entertain, which I always have. I feel like I'm not the kind of person who demands attention or needs it, but attention ends up on me, and I know how to navigate that, and people don't feel awkward when I'm engaging in conversations, especially in a group like that. And so when it was my turn, I was talking about my recent discovery that I've talked about here on my channel, about how it appears that women need to feel all the emotions over the course of a day or a week, and men don't. There's like 3 main emotions men tend to stick with, and the rest a little bit of a foreign concept. So I was talking about that. I was very passionate about it, and I think it was one of the most interesting thing anyone was talking about. I mean, it's New Year's resolutions, like, I want to lose 30 pounds. Like, that's basically what people say. But for me, it was all about, kind of as a joke, kind of to mock the system of New Year's resolutions. I said, well, the cliche is that men need to be more vulnerable and in touch with their emotions. So I just kind of shrugged it off, but that's where I ended up kind of realizing I'm cut off to certain emotions like disgust and fear and sadness. I want nothing to do with them. The thought of them actually causes a trigger and like an anger response, because all of those things I identify with weakness, and I want nothing to do with those emotions. Instead, it's anger, it's joy, and then it's basically passion. Those are my main emotions. So I was explaining this on a call. It was very interesting, but I talk longer than most people because it was a little bit of a complex concept. And so the moderator, of the group said, okay, well, and they said something that were basically like, okay, time's up, the way they said it. And immediately I muted my mic and I just stopped talking abruptly. That was my instinct. And then the moderator said, well, actually turn on your mic. You at least pick the next person to talk next. And for the rest of the meeting, I just didn't say one word. I just kept myself muted after I picked somebody else. Just removed myself. I was like the star of this call. They elected me to basically entertain them. And then after it was my turn anymore, I was still on camera, but didn't say anything. And that was the moment I realized, okay, I'm an 8. Because it seems weird to think that an 8 in times of stress goes to a 5. My son's a 5. I know what that looks like. It's someone who needs a lot of time to themselves. They can be very social, but at the end of the day, they're going to go to the corner of the room and do their own thing, and you're not going to hear from them anymore. And that's just how they operate. And so for me, it's like, if the moment I feel that I'm too vulnerable, and then I just retreat. And I've always done that. My wife has made me aware of that for years. But that was the moment I realized, okay, that's what an 8, that actually makes a lot of sense to me now, why an 8 becomes like a 5 because I was too vulnerable. That's the growth for an 8, is to be more vulnerable. But if I feel that I've been too vulnerable and open, then I back away. But I guess for me, I never wanted to actually be an 8. And I think it's because I didn't really know enough healthy 8s. And so to me, it had this negative connotation to it, because that's not who I wanted to be. I want to be a good person. I want to be a good guy, somebody that everybody can appreciate. I don't have to be liked by everybody, but in general, I want to be someone who, people can depend on, and who don't. I don't want to be seen as a jerk. But what's funny is, I am an Enneagram 8, and I'm accepting that now. But it's a little bit of a disruption of my version of reality, because I don't feel like I'm an 8. And granted, I'm a social 8, so I'm focused on other people. So it's kind of like a people-pleasing 8, but still, like all of the ingredients are still there. A constant anger that I'm very aware of and using as fuel. So that's one of the main things. Like, I'm angrier than most people just by default, and I've been saying that for a couple of years. Like, but now I get it. I thought I was a 9 leaning towards an 8, but I care too much about feeling like I'm in control of at least my own environment. So that's how I figured it out. I'm still sorting it out. I accept it, but I think that makes sense, right? I mean, I think a lot of people are afraid of even the concept of an 8, and they take these very over-the-top negative stereotypes about an 8, and they don't want to be that. Because we all generally want to be kind, likable people, right? We don't want to be the person who's too bossy. And I do tend to take over in social settings. I have that tendency. And it happens before I know it. And then I back away and I shut down. So, okay, that's what that looks like. I'm not a tyrant. I'm not a horrible person. People like me. But I've always been an 8. And the older I get, the more mature I get, the more those true colors start coming out. Because when I was a boy, I was very emotional. And then the more I matured as a man, there's a little bit more stoic quality. But I say stoic, I mean that in the way that I'm not showing certain emotions, again, like sadness and fear and disgust. But people do see the anger, people do see the passion, and people do see the joy. Like those, it's a strong presence. And it's an undeniable presence, and people do notice me when I walk in the room, and I've learned that I can feel people looking at me, like waiting for me to say something, as if my presence means I am going to basically be running the show, even though I don't have a title of leader or boss. It just happens. And I've said before in this setting, I feel like I owe it to the room. I feel like I owe it to the room to fill those gaps and to ultimately provide a sense of stability for everybody. I am an Enneagram 8. It's a social subtype, and it is the counter type, so it may not look or feel like it immediately, but it's definitely there. I'd love to hear from you. Your comments belong right here.